The air in the orientation hall tasted like money and hairspray. I'd breathed it in 100 times before. It was the official scent of competition, and to me, it smelled like home. I scanned the room, a sea of perfect teeth and disciplined postures. Girls I'd beaten before, girls I'd lost to. Just faces, obstacles between me and the Miss American Elite crown. I smoothed down my dress, my own posture a carefully constructed fortress. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to win. Then he walked onto the stage, and the expensive air went still. Alastair Finch. His name was a legend in the pageant world, whispered like a curse. They said he could spot a flaw from 100 yards away, that his critiques could make a seasoned winner cry in the wings. I just figured he was an old-school hardass, the kind who thinks pressure makes diamonds. I watched him approach the podium, a tall, severe man in a suit so sharp it could cut glass. He didn't smile. His eyes swept over us, not like a judge admiring cattle, but like a taxidermist sizing up his next project. He began the introductions. His voice was low, cultured, and carried a strange weight. One by one, girls stood up, gave their names, their states, their practiced, bubbly spiels. He'd offer a curt nod. Then it was Maya's turn, Miss California. She was a dancer, and it showed. Every movement was fluid, effortless. She practically floated to her feet. Finch didn't look at her face. His eyes were fixed somewhere around the middle of her back. He let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Your walk is lovely, Miss Evans," he finally said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "But it lacks weight, as if you're trying to escape your own skeleton." A few girls tittered nervously. I just rolled my eyes internally. What a load of pretentious crap. Just some cranky old guy trying to sound deep. I filed it away under Things to Ignore and focused on my own introduction. I nailed it, of course. My voice was steady, my smile was bright, and I met his gaze without flinching. He gave me the same curt nod as everyone else. Good. Being ignored by a man like that was a good sign. The next morning, we were on the runway for catwalk practice. The heels, the lights, the repetitive beat of the music, it was all second nature to me. But something was off. Maya, the girl who moved like water yesterday, was stiff. She kept pausing to press a hand to her lower back, her face tight with a pain she was trying to hide. She ended up next to me while we were waiting for the instructor to fix a sound issue. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice low. It wasn't concern, it was information gathering. A weakened opponent was a good thing. She forced a weak smile. "It's weird," she whispered, her voice strained. "My back has never hurt like this before. It feels... God, this is going to sound crazy, but it feels like someone's pressing a rock right into my spine." A cold little worm squiggled down my own spine. Escape your own skeleton. The phrase popped into my head, uninvited. I pushed it away. "It's the stress," I said, a little too quickly. "And these stupid heels. We've all been there." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. I didn't care. I had my own routine to perfect. Later that afternoon, I saw Isabella heading for the private interview rooms, Miss Texas. Her smile was her million-dollar weapon. It was genuine, radiant, the kind that won over sponsors and judges alike. She gave me a confident little wave as she walked past, her pearly whites practically glowing.
She was real competition. I was in the hallway grabbing a bottle of water when she came out of Finch's room maybe 20 minutes later. I froze. The smile was gone. No, that's not right. It was still there, but it was broken. Her face was a frozen mask of pleasantry, but the muscles around her mouth were twitching, pulling her lips into a grotesque, lopsided grin that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were wide, staring at nothing, like she'd just seen something truly awful. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even blinking much. She just stood there, one hand drifting up to touch her spasming cheek, as if it were a foreign object someone had glued to her face. This wasn't a girl who got a bad review. This wasn't disappointment. This was damage. I felt my own smile muscles tighten. I backed away before she could see me, my heart starting to thud against my ribs with a hard, unfamiliar rhythm.
The email arrived that evening. The subject line was bland. Official contestant update. I clicked it open. Due to a sudden and severe onset of a facial nerve spasm, Miss Isabella Reyes has chosen to withdraw from the Miss American Elite pageant. We wish her a speedy recovery. A facial nerve spasm? It sounded so clinical, so reasonable, so convenient. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the phone screen glowing in the dark room. I thought about Finch's words, "Escape your own skeleton," and Maya rubbing her back in agony. I thought about Isabella's brilliant, perfect smile, and the shattered, twitching thing it had become after 20 minutes alone with him. The logic was simple. It was terrifyingly simple. My mind laid out the facts like they were evidence in a courtroom. A plus B equals C. His words weren't critiques. They weren't metaphors. They were sentences, pronouncements. They were real. He spoke, and people broke. Fuck. I needed to get a grip. I stood up and walked to the full-length mirror, the reflection of the scared girl looking back at me, pissing me off. I took a deep breath. I was Ilara Vance. I had won 17 titles before I was 22. I did not get spooked by weird old men and coincidences. I straightened my shoulders and began to run through my opening speech, my voice filling the quiet room. I practiced my turns, my gestures, my pauses. I ended it with the smile, the one I'd spent thousands of hours and a decent amount of money on. It was flawless, polished, a weapon. The room fell silent again. I held the smile, looking at my own reflection, at the perfect symmetry of it all. And then I heard it. A whisper right beside my ear. It was his voice, so close I could almost feel the breath of it on my skin. Cold, precise. Your confidence. It's built on a foundation that cracks so easily. I whipped around, my heart leaping into my throat. The room was empty. The door was locked and chained. There was no one there. There was absolutely no one there. My hands started to shake, a tremor I couldn't control. I held them together, but it didn't stop. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the sound making me jump out of my skin. I snatched it up, my thumb trembling as I unlocked the screen. It was another email from the organizers. The subject line read, "Tomorrow's schedule." I opened it. My eyes scanned past the group breakfast, the morning photo shoot, and landed on the first line of the afternoon block. 9 a.m., personal interview and evaluation with Mr. Alastair Finch. My stomach dropped. It felt like I'd swallowed a block of ice. It was my turn.
I walked into that interview room with my armor on. Every pageant queen has it. It's made of a perfect smile, an unshakable posture, and a complete refusal to let anyone see you sweat. I was ready for him. I'd practiced my answers to every possible question about my platform, my past, my so-called flaws. I was ready for war. The room was just an office, sterile and gray. Finch sat behind a large mahogany desk, his hands steepled in front of him. He didn't tell me to sit. I sat anyway. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He just watched me. His eyes weren't critical, they were evaluative, like a geologist studying a rock, wondering where the fault lines were. I waited for the first volley. The comment about my dress, my hair, the tiny scar above my eyebrow I spent a fortune on concealer to hide. Nothing. He just stared. Seconds turned into a minute. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Finally, he spoke, his voice as quiet as the room itself. "Do you ever get tired," he asked, "of carrying yourself?" I blinked. Of all the things I'd prepared for, that wasn't one of them. "I'm sorry?" "The weight of it all," he clarified, still not moving. "The performance. It must be exhausting." I felt a flash of anger. I opened my mouth to deliver a polished, pageant-approved rebuttal about dedication and passion. But he just raised a single finger. "That will be all, Miss Vance." That was it. I walked out of that room feeling more off balance than if he'd screamed at me for an hour. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I felt a strange pressure settle across my shoulders. A physical weight. I rolled my neck, trying to shake it off. Just stress, I told myself. He's a creep. He's just trying to get in your head. But the feeling didn't go away. I walked into that interview room with my armor on. Every pageant queen has it. It's made of a perfect smile, an unshakable posture, and a complete refusal to let anyone see you sweat. I was ready for him. I'd practiced my answers to every possible question about my platform, my past, my so-called flaws. I was ready for war. The room was just an office, sterile and gray. Finch sat behind a large mahogany desk, his hands steepled in front of him. He didn't tell me to sit. I sat anyway. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He just watched me. His eyes weren't critical, they were evaluative, like a geologist studying a rock, wondering where the fault lines were. I waited for the first volley. The comment about my dress, my hair, the tiny scar above my eyebrow I spent a fortune on concealer to hide. Nothing. He just stared. Seconds turned into a minute. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Finally, he spoke, his voice as quiet as the room itself. "Do you ever get tired," he asked, "of carrying yourself?" "I'm sorry?" "The weight of it all," he clarified, still not moving. "The performance. It must be exhausting." I felt a flash of anger. I opened my mouth to deliver a polished, pageant-approved rebuttal about dedication and passion. But he just raised a single finger. "That will be all, Miss Vance." That was it. I walked out of that room feeling more off balance than if he'd screamed at me for an hour. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I felt a strange pressure settle across my shoulders. A physical weight. I rolled my neck, trying to shake it off. Just stress, I told myself. He's a creep. He's just trying to get in your head. But the feeling didn't go away.
It followed me back to my room, a phantom ache that made my posture, my carefully constructed fortress, feel like a burden. The whispers started that night. I was practicing my walk in front of the full-length mirror, the heels clicking softly on the carpet. At first, it was so faint I thought it was the TV next door. That mole on your neck, a little too prominent. I stopped, straining to hear. The room was silent. I shook my head, took a deep breath, and started again. My turn was sharp, my lines were clean. Your left collarbone sits just a fraction higher than your right. This time it was clearer. It wasn't coming from the wall or the vent or the hallway. The sound was inside. It was right behind my own thoughts, in his same low, cultured voice. I clapped my hands over my ears, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. It did nothing. The voice was in my skull. You try so hard to hide it, but the asymmetry is obvious if one knows where to look. Shut up, I whispered to the empty room. Shut the fuck up. I told myself it was just my own insecurity, my own inner critic amplified by the pressure of the competition. That's what he does. He plants a seed of doubt and lets you water it yourself. I refused to be that easy. I turned up the music on my phone, loud enough to drown out anything, and forced myself to go through my routines until my muscles burned and my mind was too tired to think. The next morning, the real terror began. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, applying my makeup. My hands were steady again. The whispers were gone. I felt a sense of relief. I'd fought it off. I was still in control. I finished with a layer of lip gloss and practiced my smile, the one that had won me 17 titles. I smiled. In the mirror, my reflection smiled back. A beat too late. It was so small, a split-second delay, that I thought I'd imagined it. I let the smile fall. My reflection smile fell a half-second after mine. My blood went cold. No way. I raised my right hand to my cheek. The girl in the mirror did the same, her movement lagging just behind mine, a tiny, horrifying echo. My hand started to shake. I watched, mesmerized, as my reflection's hand stayed perfectly still for another full second before it began to tremble too. I stumbled back, hitting the edge of the bathtub, my breath catching in my throat. The thing in the mirror stayed put, watching me. Then, slowly, it took a step back, perfectly mimicking my panicked retreat. It wasn't a reflection. It was a copycat. The mirror wasn't broken. I was. He wasn't just planting seeds of doubt in my mind anymore. He was severing my connection to reality itself. My carefully constructed fortress crumbled. Panic, raw and ugly, took over. I scrambled for my laptop, my fingers fumbling on the keys. I had to know. I couldn't be the first. I typed Alastair Finch pageant controversy into the search bar. The results were mostly glowing reviews, articles praising his uncompromising eye for perfection. I dug deeper, going back years through forums and old news sites, and then I found it, a pattern. Miss Teen Galaxy 2018. The favorite, a brilliant young girl from Oregon, withdrew 2 days before the finale. The official reason was nervous exhaustion. Southern Belle Pageant 2015. The frontrunner, a musician from Georgia, dropped out citing debilitating stage fright. Pageant after pageant, the same story. A rising star, poised to win, suddenly and inexplicably breaking down. Always a vague medical reason. Always right after the private interviews with Finch. My search led me down a rabbit hole of forgotten online communities, and finally to a blog. It hadn't been updated in 10 years. The author was a girl named Caroline Bell, a contestant in the 2012 Miss Starlight International. Her last post was titled, "For the Next One." My hands were trembling so hard I could barely control the mouse. I clicked the link. If you're reading this, it's probably too late. He's already found you. Does it start with the whispers? The little voices that point out every flaw you never knew you had? They're his. He puts them there. I felt the air leave my lungs. I read on. But the real test is the mirror. One day you'll look and she won't be you anymore. She'll be a little slow. She'll move a half-second behind you. That's how you know he's got you. That's how you know he started his work. The screen blurred. My own experience, written out a decade ago by a ghost. Don't trust what he says, and don't trust what you see. He isn't a judge. He's the soul sculptor, and we are his clay. That was the last line. I stared at the words, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't just stressed. I was walking down a path that others had walked before me, a path that led to a breakdown, to disappearance, to whatever had happened to Caroline Bell and all the others. Knock, knock. The sound from my hotel room door made me scream, a short, strangled gasp. I shot up from the desk, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. Who would be here now? I crept to the door, my body rigid, and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. The patterned carpet stretched out, silent and still. Not a soul in sight. I let out a shaky breath. My nerves were shot. It was probably just someone knocking on the wrong door. I backed away, my hand pressed to my racing heart. And then I saw it. The doorknob. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was on. It was locked, secure. The brass knob began to turn. Slowly, silently. It twisted downwards, pushed by an invisible hand on the other side. My mind screamed, but no sound came out. I was frozen, watching the simple, impossible physics of it. The lock clicked. I scrambled backward, falling over my own feet, and landed hard on the floor. I crab-walked away from the door, my eyes wide. I heard a soft rustle, a slip of paper sliding through the crack at the bottom of the door. It lay there on the carpet, a single, folded photograph. It took me a full minute to get my legs to work. Shaking, I crawled over to it. My fingers felt like ice as I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a picture of the main stage, taken from high up in the rafters. The stage was empty, except for two figures standing in the spotlight. Me and one of the other finalists, a blonde from Florida named Chloe. We were both in evening gowns. A red circle had been drawn around my head, and underneath, scrawled in a messy, urgent script, were 4 words. Almost the perfect piece. The air backstage tasted like hairspray and panic. It was a flavor I knew well, but tonight it had a metallic edge, like old blood. I stood in the wings, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, watching Chloe have her moment. She was the only one left, me and her. On the giant screens flanking the stage, her face was magnified 100 times. Perfect skin, perfect teeth, perfect everything.
She glided across the stage, a vision in sequined blue. But then I saw it. Just for a second. The camera zoomed in for a close-up as she smiled at the judges, and one of her eyes, it just didn't catch the light. It wasn't a shadow. It was a small, perfect circle of black, a tiny void where a blue iris should have been. A beat later, it was normal again, sparkling just like the other one. A trick of the light, I told myself. A camera glitch. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had to be. Then the stage manager hissed my name, and it was my turn. The walk from the darkness of the wings into the blinding white spotlights felt like stepping off a cliff. The roar of the audience was a physical wave pressing in on me. I put one foot in front of the other, my body moving on autopilot, the muscle memory of 1,000 rehearsals taking over. Smile, turn, pause, smile again. But the sound was wrong. The applause began to curdle, twisting. Underneath the clapping, I could hear whispers. Not in my head this time. They were coming from everywhere, slithering out of the speakers, woven into the murmurs of the crowd. It was his voice, Alastair Finch's voice, multiplied into a choir from hell. Look at her, still trying. I kept smiling, my face a frozen mask. My steps didn't falter. The scar on her left knee, so clumsy. A shame they couldn't cover it properly. I could feel 1,000 pairs of eyes zeroing in on my knee, hidden beneath the silk of my gown. My breath hitched, but I forced it back down. Don't let him win. Don't let him see. She's about to break. It's always so beautiful when they finally break. I reached my mark at the center of the stage. The whispers faded, replaced by the booming, cheerful voice of the host. I didn't hear a word he said. My entire world had narrowed to the judge's table, to the man sitting in the center, Alastair Finch.
He looked back at me, his face impassive, but his eyes were feasting. The host handed me the microphone for the final question. My hands were slick with sweat. Finch leaned forward, his own microphone amplifying his quiet, cultured voice across the auditorium. "Miss Vance," he said, the sound wrapping around me like a snake, "what does perfect beauty mean to you?" This was it, the final test. Win and become his next masterpiece. Lose and be shattered into pieces. I took a breath. I wasn't going to do either. I looked straight past him, into the dark lens of the main camera. I knew millions of people were watching. I thought of Caroline Bell. For the next one. "Perfect beauty," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "doesn't exist." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. I could feel the producers backstage starting to panic. This wasn't in the script. "But the obsession with it does," I continued. I held up my arm, turning it so the light caught the small brown birthmark near my elbow. My coaches, the organizers, they told me to cover this. They said it was a flaw, an imperfection. I lowered my arm and pointed a single trembling finger toward Finch. He looks for these flaws. He collects them. He uses them to carve us up from the inside until we're nothing but a hollow shell that fits his design. I took another breath. the words pouring out of me now. This birthmark is mine. The tiny scar above my eyebrow is mine. The fact that my left collarbone sits just a fraction higher than my right, that is mine. This is not a sculpture for Mr. Finch to chip away at. This is my body, and it's not perfect. Thank God. As I spoke, something started to happen. Finch, who had been watching me with a look of detached curiosity, flinched. He physically recoiled in his chair. The skin on his face seemed to loosen. The sharp, ageless confidence drained from his features, leaving behind a roadmap of deep wrinkles I hadn't seen before. His eyes, once so sharp and powerful, went dull and clouded. He looked old, ancient. He had no power here, not anymore. I wasn't feeding his parasite with my fear. I was starving it with acceptance. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He clutched his chest, his knuckles white. The stage lights above us flickered violently. A woman in the audience screamed. Finch slumped forward, his head hitting the judge's table with a dull thud. He didn't move. Chaos erupted. People were shouting, stagehands were running onto the stage. The live broadcast cut to a commercial. In the middle of it all, I just stood there, the heavy microphone still in my hand, watching the man who had tormented so many women get wheeled away on a stretcher. I hadn't won the crown. They gave it to Chloe later, in a quiet, awkward ceremony. But it didn't matter. I had won the war. The next few months were a blur. I was a hero, an icon, the girl who broke the pageant. I was on talk shows, magazine covers, my story becoming a symbol for fighting back against toxic standards. Finch, they said, had retired due to sudden and severe health complications. I knew the truth. I had cut his strings. Then came the letter. Thick, creamy cardstock with an embossed logo. It was an offer. The pageant board, in an effort to rebrand and show their commitment to positive change, wanted me to take over Alastair Finch's position, head judge for the Miss American Elite pageant. I accepted. Of course I accepted. This was my chance. I could change it. I could dismantle the whole rotten system from the inside. The night of the pageant arrived. I sat in the chair. His chair. It felt right, solid, powerful. I watched the first contestant walk out. A young girl from Ohio, with bright, hopeful eyes and a nervous tremor in her hands. She was beautiful. She was terrified. She stood at her mark and gave me a shaky, practiced smile. I opened my mouth, intending to offer a word of encouragement, something to put her at ease. But the words that slipped out were not my own. They were cold, precise, and sharp as a shard of glass. "Your smile," I heard myself. My voice a calm, evaluative whisper that carried perfectly through the microphone. "It's a little stiff." The moment the words left my lips, I felt it. A jolt, a current of familiar, chilling power surging up my spine, settling across my shoulders like a royal mantle. The girl's face fell, her confidence cracking like a mirror. I looked down at my hands, resting on the polished table. They looked steady, strong. A faint smile touched my lips. The loop hadn't been broken. It had just found a new